and her invitation to be here. Asking me to come talk to anybody about the Camino is just about the biggest of course issue there is. You don't have to ask me twice. You know, this is one of the loves of my life. And so thank you for reaching out. And thank you all for being here. It is delightful. This is where this ongoing act of pilgrimage has delivered me. And so being here tonight with you all is nothing short of a blessing. So I'm nothing but grateful. I must acknowledge, we do have a couple of artists in the room. Brian Whelan is here. Brian is the artist who painted Holy City, which is on exhibit at the Hartford International University for Religion and Peace. If you have not gotten to see that, please do. My partner Jennifer, who's with me here tonight, another Jennifer LaRue, and I went to see it last week and literally found the need to sit with it, just to be in a room and sit with it. There's just wonderful stuff in there. There's a lot going on, and I would suggest you take some time with it. I found it to be, he uses the term, an aspirational holy city, and I think that's just so much closer to truth, capital T, than any earthly city that you will find. And I found it to be a joyful, colorful expression of pilgrimage, and it captures that innocence. And so beautiful work, and I'm so glad you're here, and thank you for being here. And I got another writer in the room, my writer buddy Jack Sheedy is here. Put your hand up, brother. And Jack's got some wonderful work out. Look him up on Amazon, Jack Sheedy. And my father's Tire Tracks is his latest, and it's a beautiful memoir. So you simply must read it, because he's my friend. So it's been a while since I've done a pilgrimage talk. Probably a couple of years, and I do my best to make each one just a little bit different, but always it's the same problem, you know, like where do you begin? As a writer, the beginnings of things are often a little consuming. So I will tell you that pilgrimage is often, if not always, the result of having been called. It is the result of a calling. And mine, my own particular calling, had the gift of being unambiguous. Some people, there's a bit of a doubt about that. My pilgrimage calling was definitely not. So it wasn't necessarily a typical one, but of course it's the only one I can speak to. So I think I'll start there. I'm out for a walk in my new hometown of Morris, Connecticut. It's mid-August of 2012, and it's one of those hot, hazy, humid summer days. And I walk every day. Unless weather is awful, I walk every day. So I was out and trucking along about a half a mile from where I live, just walking along, minding my own business. I was coming off a sabbatical summer from my previous work. Everything is coming up roses. I'm going into a business partnership with somebody else, feeling optimistic and uplifted, a little sad to be having to go back to work, but other than that, everything is great. Walking along, step, 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 foot comes off the ground. Before that foot returns to the ground, the complete reality of the Camino de Santiago enters my life. There is no decision, there is no choice, it simply now is. Foot returns to the ground. So, my body jerked, a noise came out of me, some kind of noise came out of me. And strangely enough, I followed the first directive of pilgrimage, which is no matter what, just keep walking. And I did, I just kept walking. And the first thing I thought of was, my God, I've lost my mind. I thought I had some kind of a break. Things like this don't happen to people like me. I was on the heels at the time of coming off a very dark time, a very difficult year. If you've read the book, you know. And if not, maybe we can get into it later, but I certainly don't like to lead with that. It's kind of a buzz buster. And I came also with knowledge of the Camino. I had read about it back in the 1980s in the book Iberia by James Michener. He mentioned it in the last chapter. And if you've ever read a Michener book, getting to the last chapter is an accomplishment in and of itself. But so there I was, and after a while, the thoughts kind of calmed down, and then this impression came, and the impression was something like this. There was no words, but if there were words, it would have said, hey, it's okay, relax. You're not going next Tuesday. This is going to be all right. Live your life, do your thing, and when the time is right, you'll know, and you will go, because this is now a reality of your life. Have a nice day. So, one of the great ironies in my life, there are many great ironies in my life, but I'm what I would describe as a cradle Catholic. I was born into the Catholic Church. I was baptized. I left the Catholic Church with great finality as a teenager, and my interests and my traditions have drifted markedly to the east since then. And still, two things. Somehow, the teacher appears to me in the form of the written words of Thomas Merton. And, if that weren't enough, one of my best friends is a Catholic priest. You can't escape. Catholicism has this thing you cannot escape. So, I went and talked to him. I thought, this is a guy that knows a thing or two about callings. And he listened to the story, and he did not judge, he did not try to interpret. He just listened to me, and he said, and I quote him, "No, Steve, you have not lost your GD mind. It's okay. And wouldn't it be wonderful if someday you could walk to Santiago?" And that was how we left it. And I walked away there feeling, well, this is something I think could be. It could be a reality for me. So, 3.5 years later, I found myself bound for Spain, or bound for Paris, and then a series of trains to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is, let's see if I can work this now. This dot right here, which is the beginning, the traditional starting point of the Camino de Frances, the French route of the Camino de Santiago. Tonight, I'd like to deal with kind of some of the larger aspects of pilgrimage. And I look at it as an extraordinary demonstration of faith and courage to just give up everything for the time and go to some place completely unknown and walk on unknown ground. Now, I'm a pretty adventurous person, but I don't think everyone is. And I came to appreciate in my fellow pilgrims their sense of newfound adventure, of inspired adventure. So I don't think there's anybody out there incapable of this in terms of the motivation, but I just want to acknowledge that it's something for a lot of people to consider doing this. A couple of quotes to get this kind of going. The first is from Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist nun, and she speaks to this. She says, "To be fully alive, fully human, and completely awake is to be continually thrown out of the nest. To live fully is to always be in no man's land." And I have to put a quote in here from Merton because I just do. He's describing a circular movement with this idea of pilgrimage. The geographical pilgrimage, he says, is the symbolic acting out of an inner journey. The inner journey is the interpolation of the meanings and signs of the outer pilgrimage. One can have one without the other. It is best to have both. So at this point, I want to ask by a show of hands, how many folks here have walked any of the Camino routes? 2, okay. And of you, the lady in the back first, which route or routes did you walk?
I'm Susan Edgar.
Oh, hi.
I walked the last 106 kilometers with a group from First Church. And we started
Okay.
to do all the whole thing, and I just came back from walking another 85 miles.
Wonderful. So that was on the French route? You walked from
So
Sarriá?
this trip was only the wilderness parts, the nicest parts.
Okay. All
We
right.
didn't do any of the industrial walking.
Gotcha. And then the other lady, where did you walk?
Pretty much the same route toward the end. I did Sarriá in the French route, just Sarriá.
Okay. So yeah. All right. So let me give you an idea about this French route. This is. Has anybody? Show of hands. How many people have seen the movie The Way? Oh, a whole bunch of you. Yeah. The Way is a depiction of this route from all across the north of Spain. So it starts traditionally in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. Whoops, there we go. No? Oh, it does that too.
Yowza.
How about that? There we go, thank you. You just learned something. It starts here in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. It crosses over the French border here, the French-Spanish border, to Roncesvalles, and then all across through Pamplona, Logroño, Burgos, León, and on out to the city of Santiago de Compostela. The object of the pilgrimage, the physical object of the geographic pilgrimage, is the city of Santiago de Compostela, the Cathedral of St. James in that city, and specifically the reliquary in the crypt beneath the altar, said, you can hear my skepticism, said to contain the bones of St. James, the apostle of Jesus. This pilgrimage factors really strongly into Spanish history, and I'll be alluding to that a little bit later, but that is a topic unto itself. So the reason I wanted to focus on this particular route, there is this triune nature of this walk. And I think it owes to its overall length. It's not the longest walk. I'd say it's the second or the third longest walk. But it breaks down roughly in thirds as to how it's experienced. There are no hard and fast boundaries to this. But for the first part, we'll say from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Burgos. Burgos is considered the gateway to the Meseta, which is this whole middle section here, 240 kilometers of flat nothingness. And then past Astorga, we rise up into the mountains and we end up in Santiago de Compostela. Between Saint-Jean and Burgos, the centering experience of the Camino is a very carnal one. It's about the body. It's about realizing that we can and must put a pack on our back every day and walk. We're not going out for the 15-mile Sunday walk and then taking a rest for a couple of months. We're doing the same thing day after day after day. But it's about the surroundings. It's about the food. It is about meeting others. It's a very body-oriented experience. And then we get to Burgos, and the centering experience shifts, and it shifts into a matter of the mind. And to either side of that centering experience of mind, there's body and spirit. Crossing the Meseta around about Astorga, there's a transition into the centering experience of the spirit. Coincidentally, in the geographic pilgrimage, there is ascension into mountains. And to either side of that centering experience is body and mind. Now, again, I mentioned that this is not something that happens from point A to point B to point C. This can happen on any given day, in any given moment. And I point to this by reading the last paragraph of my first chapter. This is at the end of the first day. And if you listen to what I'm about to read, you will likely hear all three of those qualities, those realities, that triune nature in this one paragraph at the end of day one. Long before I came here, I'd heard of the mysterious energy of the Camino, and though it remains enigmatic, I believe it touched me today. It's like a wispy, ephemeral current, subtle and perfect. It flows towards Santiago de Compostela from everywhere, neither pushing nor pulling. The pilgrim rides along on this current, and it infuses the body when the more carnal energy wanes. It infuses everything, really. It has intention, and it has intelligence. It has a thing to tell me. It is expressed in the wind at my back, and the wind in my face, and the driving rain, and the warmth of the refuge. It lives in the air, in others, and in the inspiring answers to fearful thoughts. It shows itself to me in the peaceful eyes of standing cows and indifferent sheep, in the reassuring songs of cuckoos, and in the holy act of ascension. I am relieved it has not forgotten me, since it called as I walked along a country road in Morris, Connecticut. All three things, one moment. So there is this idea. I mentioned the energy of the Camino in that reading. And there's this idea that it almost assumes a personality. You listen to conversations between pilgrims. Oh, let me tell you what the Camino showed me today, or what the Camino did, or who the Camino put in my way. Right? So I would submit it's the energy of the Camino. The Camino is something on the order of grace, and that it becomes this omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent presence. It knows, and it provides these experiences that lead us to our interior pilgrimage destination, as well as the geographical one. So pilgrimage, expressed either individually or in a group, is at its essence an act of just unbelievable simplicity. Wake up in the morning, put everything you own in a bag, put the bag on your back, walk, notice, nourish, rest, repeat. That's pretty much it. There's nothing more to it. There doesn't have to be anything more to it than that. And this idea of minimal distraction leads us to there's this potential for insights that we normally wouldn't find in our real life. The first couple of weeks or so out on the route, a route this long, pilgrims will have conversations with themselves and say, how do we bring this beautiful thing we found here back to the real world? And then I found, crossing that middle section, that Meseta, the thought dawns on me and says, oh, this is the real world. That thing I live back home is an experience of daily distraction. Those distractions keep me from realizing the things that I find out here every day. So I want to describe to you another reading, if you will. Indulge me. This is an example of what can happen. Just walking along. It was in the first part of the pilgrimage. I was in the region of La Rioja. I was walking with my German friend. In the book, I named him Heinrich, but we're all friends here. I can tell you his real name was Heinz. Heinz and I were walking along, and he was a wonderful walking partner, kind of a stoic German fellow, and he knew he was very engaging in conversation, but he also respected the need to be silent, to just walk. And so we were coming out of the city of Santo Domingo de la Casadilla, and beautiful day, just walking along. Check this out. Before resuming its proximity to the highway, the Camino zigzags a bit, and contained in my view for a time, I see between 1 and 2 kilometers of the path's blonde dirt ahead as it courses through the deep green slopes. All along its track are pilgrims, perhaps 30 or so in small clusters or alone, spread out and moving westward. For just a bare moment, for just the briefest fraction of a footstep on a Morris road of a moment, I see it all differently. No longer do I see pilgrims, I see pilgrimage. A movement towards something, a movement away, a movement of grace. I realize in this moment I am not apart from them or they from me. I am in no way living in opposition to them. I am them. And in the larger context of life beyond the Camino, all the competing needs and desires, all the conflicting interests, all the wounds inflicted and received, all the differences of body and thought and language, and most certainly of religion, are revealed as only mistaken notions of things. Elegies of separation become expressions of compassionate oneness along this thin, magical road to Santiago. Realization loves to dance here, to be glimpsed, even if only in the briefest of flashes. So I mentioned to you before that when I write, I always read back to myself. And I always read aloud so I can find my first round of mistakes that I've made. And when I read this, I don't remember if it was the first time I read it back to myself or if it was sometime after that, but it was fairly early on, and it dawned on me the similarity between that experience and Merton's experience on a street corner in Louisville, Kentucky. He's out, he's on a shopping errand from Gethsemane. He's doing his thing downtown Louisville. And all of a sudden, he's looking around and he sees the people on the street. This is not a conducive place for spiritual experience, but he sees them all as balls of light and joy and love, and he feels at one with them. Just remarkable. And this just walking on the Camino, just on another day, nothing special. I think that's remarkable. I really do. So what do we bring to pilgrimage? I would submit that in addition to our physical selves and the equipment that we need and all those practical things, we bring intention. It seems to be the most essential thing anyway, is this idea of intention, a movement of thought toward one's center, something to ponder or resolve or surrender, usually derived from our outer experience, something that's happened, loss, grief, an impending life decision, some calamity, some trauma, some celebration. I met plenty of people on the routes who were celebrating the freedom of retirement, some from the freedom of divorce. But usually it's much deeper than that. This is not about, well, let's go take a hike in Europe, or let's do some trekking. It's much deeper than that. Although even considering that notion, that even the more superficial motivations to be there can produce something remarkable. And I think of my friend that I met on the very first night in Roncesvalles. We were sitting in a bar, having a conversation, three of us, and this one fellow was there. His name was Jim, I believe. And so that's what I named him in the book. A retired federal guy. He was an American. And he had spent the previous winter in Key West, Florida, probably the most hedonistic place on the planet. And he was fishing tarpon off a kayak. And he was in a bar one night and overheard this conversation next to him about this thing in Spain. And he thought, hey, that sounds really good for the spring. I'll go there. Maybe I'll meet some women. And this was the primary motivation of him being there, was to have as much carnal knowledge as he could possibly gain as he walked across. This guy was for real. I thought, well, whatever moves you, man. And I saw him a couple of times. The last time I had seen him was in a town called Ontanas, and he had tales to tell. Things were going well with his pilgrimage. And then, after that big long Meseta there, I was sitting on a rest day. Where was I? And I was in right about here. That's Leon. I was on a rest day in Leon, and I was sitting on the main plaza. It was a busy Saturday morning, people all around, lots of hubbub and energy in the air. And I had closed my eyes, and I wanted to experience just the sounds and the other senses without vision. And I was just sitting there and completely immersed in the experience. And something told me, open your eyes. So I opened my eyes. And I see this guy walking across the plaza. Right in front of me is the Cathedral of Leon, and he's walking toward me. And he's got a wide-brimmed hat on, and his face is shaded, and all I see is this big grin on his face. And he looks vaguely familiar. He's got a little bit of a limp going on. He's got his pack on, he's got a walking stick, he's definitely just gotten into town, and it's this guy. And he comes over to me and he says, hey, Stephen, good to see you, man. You know, gives me a hug, pulls a map out of his side pocket, and he says, I'm trying to find this albergue. Can you help me? And I said, I was just down there. It was near the Basilica of San Isidoro. It was right across the plaza. I said, it was just there. Come on, let's walk. And I listened to this guy. I have no idea what happened to this man out there, but it was no longer about meeting girls. This was a changed human being. Something had happened. I can still get choked up thinking about this guy. I didn't see him after that. I have no idea what happened to him out there, but he was a completely different human being. I would call that a retrograde calling. I don't know. So we arrive at our destination, the geographical place. And it could be a city, a church, a reliquary, right? But what about that inner journey? I would submit that that takes a while to be revealed. I'm still understanding mine, and I walked this route in 2016. I walked other routes last year, but even this experience is still something that is working itself through, and I'm not so sure we ever arrive. But this is what the end can be like, and this is just kind of how it struck me. I'm just a pilgrim, but this is how it ended for me. When you arrive at the cathedral, there are things you do. Typically you go to the pilgrim mass. It's been going on every day for about 800 years. And they swing the big botafumeiro, the 3-foot-high censer that smokes the place up. They used to do it to cover the smell of pilgrims. And the tradition continues. They do this. It's a spectacle. But it's deeply moving, even for a cradle Catholic like myself. And then there's a little visit to the backside of a larger-than-life statue of St. James in the retablo section of the altar. And then you go down these stairs. Here we go. The final pilgrim custom is no small matter. It is the object of the pilgrimage itself, the relics of St. James, apostle of Jesus. I follow a roped-off route from the stairs that leads to the cool, dark crypt beneath the altar. I lower myself onto a kneeler and face an elegantly illuminated, ornately decorated silver chest. There is absolute quiet, of course, but also a depth of quiet dignity and power that startles me. Here, I choose to suspend my skepticism regarding its contents. Are they really the bones of the saint, or a Camino legend hovering in some vague netherworld of superstition and fact-tinged belief? Was this merely an elaborate story created to inspire the Spanish people in their fight with the Muslims and then perpetuated throughout the centuries? I do not care. Its truth lies in the journeys of those who have made their way here for over 1,000 years through mountain passes, deep rolling hills, and seeming endless unshaded plains through all manner of weather. It lies in the kindness afforded them by strangers and each other, the infinite stories and purposes that call them here, and the mysterious intelligence that carried them on its power. The truth of it lies in every realized revelation of every pilgrim who ever walked. It lies in their utter surrender to the ways of the road. Whatever is contained in this reliquary has served creation exceedingly well. And so I pray and honor those who came before me and those who will follow. I honor every thought that comes to them on their own country roads of home that lead them here. So that is essentially the end of the geographic pilgrimage. And again, I would submit that, and I'll discuss this in a moment, there's always more to it. There's always more to it. It's a bit of an anticlimax to arrive in Santiago de Compostela, but it is a deeply satisfying moment, to say the least. I'd like to offer a few quotes. So we'll picture this as a funnel. The first one's going to be a big fat one, and it's from my man Thomas Merton. And it will eventually get to a point. He says, man instinctively regards himself as a wanderer and a wayfarer, and it is second nature for him to go on pilgrimage in search of a privileged and holy place, a center and source of indefectible life. This hope is built into his psychology, whether he acts it out or simply dreams it. His heart seeks to return to a mythical source, a place of origin, the home where the ancestors came from, the mountain where the ancient fathers were in direct communication with heaven, the place of the creation of the world, paradise itself with its sacred tree of life. One more quote a little bit down. Who am I going to quote? Anybody? Merton. We have come to the end of a long journey and see that the stranger we meet there is no other than ourselves. One more to put a fine point on this. And it's not going to be Merton, I promise. Hafez, I've heard it and seen it written both ways. A Sunni mystic. Leave it to a Sunni. I felt in need of a great pilgrimage, so I sat still for 3 days. Let's show you some slides. This, again, I have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to photographs. Now, I only have a finite number because time is of the essence. But oh, I could show you some photos. You gotta come over some night. So this is the route. Let me see. No? Jennifer, I got it. This is Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. Beautiful little town, nestled in the Pyrenees Mountains. You can see them in the background there. This is where one of two routes will take you to your first stop across the border in Spain in Roncesvalles, either the valley route, the Valcarlos route, or the one that most of us crazy people take, which is the high route, the Napoleon route. This is the hardest day of the entire route, day one. Oh, I could tell you stories about that day. This is one of the higher meadows there, just as stark beauty. It's about halfway across the Napoleon route. This is Pamplona, the third day of pilgrimage. One arrives in Pamplona. I kind of leaned out of my pension room and took this photo. There's a lot of historical places in Pamplona. I could have photographed. This one captured it for me. This place is called Gwendoline. It's a ruin. The building on the left was once a palace, obviously a church on the right, and it is in the plains that are just west of Pamplona. I write about this place in chapter 3, and it is my first encounter with a thin place. It doesn't always look like this. This is in mid-April of the year, and these are all canola blooms. The fact checker failed me, and I call them, in the book, I call them mustard plants, because they are similar, but these are actually canola blooms. And remember when we were kids and we used to hold the buttercups and we would make the reflection on our chin? Picture an entire environment like that. It's like in the air. It doesn't capture on this photo. I took this with an iPhone 6. It doesn't capture, but it is the most magical thing. And it's all about the way it is in the current moment. And there was 3 of us walking together, a Canadian, a German, and myself, and we just kind of dropped our packs and our sticks and we're standing there staring at this. It was magnificent. It was a slice of heaven itself. It was my first experience with a thin place. And then the light changed, and it's just a field with some ruins. How it can just change in a heartbeat. If you are walking any other time of year, you will find this is just fallow dirt. There's just nothing impressive about it. You'll walk right on by. This just stopped me in my tracks. And if you are particularly astute and you have read my book, this turned out to be the cover art. The right side is the front cover, the left side is the back cover. I was blessed with having a really good book designer who pulled that off. Oh. This is the bridge at Puente la Reina, Bridge of the Queen. Back in the dark days of pilgrimage, medieval times, there were unscrupulous ferrymen who charged exorbitant rates to get pilgrims across that river. Queen Monadona said, heck no, we're going to build a bridge. And she did. And that's a classic 6-arch Roman bridge. That bridge has been there for about 1,000 years. And it's got the original stones. To walk across those stones, it's just a walk through time. Now, Brian and I were kind of talking about this before. This may be the most photographed marker on the Camino for 2016. I have probably seen hundreds of photos of this thing, but this one is mine. And it's the boot and the flowers that struck everybody. But there's something to be learned here. If you see the abstract representation there of the scallop shell, the meaning of that is all roads lead to Compostela, to Santiago. And on this route, the base of the scallop shell will always be pointing towards Santiago, and to back that up is the traditional yellow arrow. I just can't, every time I do one of these, I just can't resist showing this picture. It's silly, but indulge myself. This is in the region of La Rioja. Just another day on the pilgrimage. You can kind of see the Camino coursing ahead. You look ahead just a little bit, you can see some pilgrims there. And that particular style of marker says A Santiago, to Santiago. This is the cathedral in Burgos. Burgos is considered the gateway to the Meseta. Took a rest day here. Sadly, this is mostly a museum. The front door on the right-hand side goes into a small capilla or chapel, and that's where the place of worship is. It's just behind that front door there. The rest of it is basically a museum. They spent in excess of 500 years building this thing. Remarkable. This is the Meseta. Now again, this is in the spring. If you come through later in the summer into the fall, this is all blonde. But most of that is wheat and new growth wheat and grass, and it just goes on forever. This is the cathedral at León, and this cathedral, unlike the one in Burgos, is a house of worship. It has, I can't remember how many square meters of stained glass, but to visit this cathedral, you want to go in at different times of the day so that you can see different light coming through the stained glass and confirming it. It is just, it's all about light, and it is beautiful, just beautiful. This guy, there's a little irony with him. We had a conversation, he and I. And this is in León, Plaza San Marcos. If you saw the movie The Way, Martin Sheen's character treats his friends to a night in a fancy hotel. It is the Parador San Marcos, and he is facing the Parador. You know, talk about irony, just a defeated pilgrim, facing this, satin sheets of the Parador. You can see the yellow marker showing the direction of the French route westward out of town. This guy is also the starting point of the Camino San Salvador, which I'll show you in a little bit. I walked that last year. This was a touching moment for me, though. I kind of imagined a conversation between the two of us. This is more my taste. This is the chapel in Rabanal. This is the last stop before you go to Cruz de Ferro, the Iron Cross, where you leave your burdens. I'll show you a photo in just a moment. But every night at 7:30, they have Vespers, and they sing Gregorian chant. They bless the pilgrims. This is more my speed. This is a house of worship. It's run by a British fraternity, and there's a group of monks there who live by Benedictine rule, and they are just delightful. One of them will come out, speak in Spanish, to introduce what we're about to experience, and then he shifts right into flawless English and gives the same thing, and then shifts into flawless French and gives the same talk, and then they start chanting, and it is just spiritually thrilling. Cruz de Ferro is one of the emotional high points of the route, and that's basically 1,000 years worth of stones that people have left. This was a profoundly emotional experience for me. Going to leave my burdens in the form of stones and finding out that, well, there's that Camino as person again. The Camino had a thing to show me. There was more. I didn't realize it until I got there. This is from the top of the climb to O Cebreiro. If anybody read Paulo Coelho's book, The Pilgrimage, this is where his pilgrimage ended in his fictional story of his pilgrimage to Santiago. He never made it to Santiago. He made it as far as this place. But this is back looking east, and that's after about 8 kilometers of climbing. Again, in the region of Galicia and heading into an ascension. This is what the Cathedral of Santiago looked like in 2016. They were scrubbing up the exterior, and they would next tackle the interior in preparation for the holy year of what was to have been 2021, which is determined by where the feast day of St. James falls in the week. So when it falls on a Sunday, it's July 25th, it's a holy year. And they were prepping it for the holy year. I found this to be poetic, though. You know, I arrived, this was not my moment. I was a little crabby that day. I got rained on really bad, and I was tired, and my back hurt, and I was a little PO'd. And I looked at this thing and I said, just like the pilgrims, a work in progress. It redeems itself in a moment, though. Hang in there. This is the reliquary. It just speaks for itself. And this is a sunset in Finisterre. Many pilgrims will go on to Finisterre one way or another. They find their way there. I took a bus to Sea and walked 13 kilometers. Many walk from Santiago. I did it on my last pilgrimage. I went there for 9 days, and I walked the moors by the ocean. And this is when the experience of the Camino began to coalesce for me. I began to understand more. I'm so glad I did that. I was not going to do that. It just sort of happened that way. But it was a remarkable 9 days. This route that you see here depicted from Leon north through the mountains to Oviedo is the Camino San Salvador. My intention for walking the French route was that dark period I mentioned. There was a lot of grief, a lot of loss, a lot of change. This one came to me last year during the spring. I was in a period of deep reflection, and the commotion came up, the calling came up to do this route and another one. And I wasn't too sure if I was going to walk another route. There's a route that goes, this Y-shaped route here is the Camino Inglés. You can start in A Coruña or Ferrol, and I was going to walk the longer side, but I wasn't really feeling inspired about it. And then a friend of mine reached out and said, have you thought about the San Salvador? It's a 10,000 foot elevation gain and loss on this thing. It's no joke. But it's 6 stages, and it fit into the time thing. And more than that, when I saw video content online of this route, I wept, and that's when I knew it was my route to walk. So I did that, and the intention with this one was to walk in a consideration of penitence. And what I was doing was shadow work. I was looking at the darker sides of the nature of how I have lived. We all have our shadows, right? And this was where I considered mine. This is some of the landscape on the San Salvador, markedly different than you will find anywhere else. Shortly after sunrise, just beautiful. A good place to consider a penitent way. Very difficult. This is what the cathedral in Santiago looks like these days. I got to Oviedo. I took a rest day there. I rented a car. I drove over to Santiago. I turned the rental in at the airport, which allowed me to walk the last 13 kilometers of the French route one more time into Santiago and that's what things are looking like these days. Much, much better. So, from Santiago, one walks to the ocean, and this is the second walk I did on last year's pilgrimage. To Noguera, Oviedo, then there's a fork in the road. You can go direct to Muchia, or you can go out to Finisterre, the end of the earth. Finisterre are the same. Finisterre is Gallego for Finisterre. And then from there, I walked north to Muchia. So this walk was a contemplation of life through the lens of the experience of grace. And when I got to Muchia, and I was all done walking, these are eucalyptus forests. Walking through these after a rain with a breeze, I can't tell you, the aroma is just, it's unspeakable. It's just beautiful. This is on the way to Noguera. First look at Finisterre, finger of land pointing out into the Atlantic. And that's the 0 kilometer marker of the Camino Finisterre. In Galicia, in the fall, it rains. It rains constantly. And that's what this walk was all about. And this is Muchia. So there I am sitting by the rocks there, and I'm getting some discernment. And the discernment I got was goodbye. I don't think I'm walking anymore. I was talking to Jennifer before we started, and she put it perfectly. My work is done. My walk is done. But I'm still on pilgrimage. Life as pilgrimage. So there we go. I would love to respond to any questions that you may have. And this is where I get to find out all the things I should have talked about. So feel free. Jack.
As you know, I drove across the. As you know, I drove. Hello.
There we go.
I drove across the country 3 years ago, and this country. It's a much different kind of a journey, but there are things that you feel along the way. Because I went by myself, and I'm just wondering. I know you met a lot of people on the way, but actually you're by yourself on a pilgrimage in a way. So, what kind of feelings came over you at what time? Say at the beginning and in the middle, and when you got to the end, what kind of, was it a letdown? Was it triumphant? How did you feel?
I'll start with the last part first. There's this sense that we arrive into Santiago, and it's we get welcomed by bagpipers into Santiago. But to me, it was more like a requiem. It was a sad thing because I'd come to love walking so much. And so there was a bit of a letdown. And as I said, I arrived in kind of a crabby condition. The next day was much better. I'd gotten a good night's rest. But there's every feeling that you can imagine. I'm walking back through, especially crossing the Meseta. Give you an example. It's very common to have this happen where you're walking along and everything is just, it's a beautiful day, it's just wonderful, and then all of a sudden, chest heaving, sobs. And that's a feeling, but when nobody can identify, what is that? My theory was that something was being purged. And I can't put my finger on what that was. I mentioned coming to Cristofero and thinking I was going to be letting go. Oh, I'm dropping my burdens, how wonderful. And then I was confronted with something else, something completely out of left field that I never expected. So it's the Camino's way, it's Grace's way of saying, well, pal, yeah, good for you, you got here, you dropped your burdens. Now there's this other matter that we need to go through. So it's like that. I don't know if that answers the question, but It's about the best I can do at this point. There was a question over here. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for coming out tonight and sharing your experience with us.
Thanks for being here.
Mine is more observation. I watched the way and fell in love with the idea of making that trip. I set out to start training for it and got out to 3 months where I was walking every other day, 12 miles, and was getting ready to put the backpack on and start adding some weight to it. And then I allowed people to talk me out of that dream. But I will share with you, you talked about the spirit of the Camino and that experience. I'm a long distance motorcycle rider, and one might question, for me, meditation doesn't have to be a quiet space. It can be on the back of a motorcycle. But I was on Route 50 in Kansas, and the wind blows through there all day long. You're leaning into it all day, and these wide open prairies that are just gorgeous. And I had to stop and just relax and kind of take it in. And the experience I had was leaning up against a fence post and closing my eyes, and all of a sudden hearing kids' laughter and hearing the creak of an ox yoke, the snap of a whip, the movement of wheels across the ground. And I sat, I'm not sure, I felt like, I don't know where I felt I was in that experience. But I thought that in one day, I traveled more distance than they probably traveled in a month. And that the sound of that wind in my ears probably could drive me crazy in 30 days, that constant drone of the wind in my ears. But there was a spiritual side to that, of recognizing what these people went through, what they gave of themselves to meet their needs. So the end of my journey was on a pier in California. I finished up Route 66 on that particular trip, and the feeling of accomplishment is, but there's a desire for more, that venture. And one thing I would, in closing, would say that when you talked about coming to the Y, going to Finisterre, you can go to the right or left, is the prayer, one of Thomas Merton's prayer about coming to the Y and not knowing whether to go left or right. And there's no right way, either way makes God happy. And so I'm touched by your journey and sharing that with us tonight, so thank you.
What's your name?
Craig.
Craig, I'm touched by yours. Pilgrimage comes in many forms, and you described the thin place beautifully. The interesting thing about the Camino, and we'll just refer to that French route, there's so many routes, but anything that has been going on for that long, it leaves something behind. I don't mean to get all woo-woo with you guys, but really, it leaves something behind. It is a palpable energy. And I think sometimes it just reveals itself in different ways, But if you have an unresolved calling, maybe it would be good to visit that. It was beautiful what you said. Thank you. Thanks so much. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I noticed that none of the pictures include crowds. We think of pilgrimages like the Hajj and what we saw this summer, and just
Right.
no.
Right.
I mean, do you run into clusters and crowds, and you kind of say, "Out of my way," or do you just have this infinite patience?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. Most of my walking was fundamentally alone, but you do run into clusters of folks, particularly on the French route in the last 100 kilometers. It starts in Sarria and it goes to Santiago, and this is the minimum distance required to get a Compostela certificate. The first time I walked, I got a Compostela. I just had to. I'm not real big on that stuff, but I needed to. The last two pilgrimages I did, the last two routes I did, I didn't choose to do that. But it does get crowded, and and yet there's this joyfulness, there's this innocence of pilgrimage that seems to carry us through that. Most of my walking, Heinz and I had agreed that in Burgos we were going to part ways because we were both almost the same age. I had just turned 60, he was about to turn 60. And we had agreed that we needed to do the Meseta alone. And that tended to carry through beyond that. It was just my preference. But I'm an introvert. You know, I'm an introvert who can get up and do this for a brief period of time. I probably don't look like an introvert right now. Trust me, I am. Any questions, Jennifer will be glad to help you out with that. Yes, sir.
I have a similar question, but first off, I'm enjoying your book. My wife is reading it to me, so.
How romantic.
I don't get the lecture of seeing the maps. But anyway, I used to in my previous life plan meetings and do stuff. And I'm looking at it. It looked like there was a lot of arrows. It looked like there was a symbols.
Mhm.
Is it promoted? Is it tourism? And I guess I'm wondering how many folks are along the way. You talked about the mass at the Pilgrim Mass. A lot of folks there every day. On the same question about the crowds, but I guess I'm wondering, is it, do you have to do a lot of the coordination yourself, or was it done for you?
There's options. There's actually a lot of companies out there now that coordinate tours, Camino tours. And it's all a matter of, you know, what your preferences are for accommodations, how much you want to experience on your own, of your own volition. There are people who will help with planning itineraries for folks going on Caminos in the fashion that I did. When I did it in 2016, and again, I'm talking the long route, the 800-kilometer route, it was possible to wing it. The year I went, of all the routes, there were 150,000 Compostelas issued, right? Last year, there was over 300,000 issued on the French route alone. It's gotten crowded, and so you don't have the luxury anymore of saying, well, let's see, I think I'll go to Villafranca today. No, maybe I'll go on to San Juan de Obispo or something. The spontaneity's kind of been snatched out of it. There's a lot of infrastructure on that route. The route that I did in this past year, the Camino San Salvador, that was very much a wing it thing, not much infrastructure. When I walked from the airport to Santiago this last time, I encountered more pilgrims in the first half kilometer than I did on the entire Camino San Salvador. And that was on the French route. So things have gotten a little crazy. Last year's Compostela count, I don't think I'm talking out of school here, it was close to 500,000 for all the routes. So it's gotten to be quite the thing to do, but it's cyclic, you know. So, but there's ways to do it. You can do it individually, you can do it very inexpensively, or you can really get some nice accommodations and go for it.
Hi, Stephen. I loved your book.
Thank you.
But as you were meeting all these different people, I wondered what it was. I was wondering if you wanted to be alone sometimes, and if it was possible to say to that person, I'm going to do this by myself, like you and Hans did that. But was there ever anybody that you were with that, I know you meant that really, the guy that was miserable, but was there anyone that you said, you know, I think I'd like to be alone, and he's such a nice guy, I don't know how I'm going to tell him that. Did that ever come up?
It comes up for, did not come up for me, other than that one fellow from Wales who was just anyway, he was painful. That was a very fleeting thing, but it's part of the dynamics. But there's this understanding when you're out there. You know, everybody's really respectful of other people's needs, you know, and that's just, it's okay to say things like that. To say, I just need to. A lot of people wear little signs that I'm staying silent, you know, and that's possible as well. You know?
And one more question.
Sure.
You said, you showed that picture and you said, and that was it, I was done. Does that mean that you're not going to do any more of those?
I don't think
You still walk around Morris?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I mean, and when I greeted you all before, I said my pilgrimage delivered me here. It continues, you know, whether I'm on a route, that's just, you know, the condition of the moment. But I really have come to take this Camino as life approach, or pilgrimage as life approach. But I think I'm done walking routes for now. Yeah, but I've been full before.
Were the other two that, go ahead. Were the other two that you walked, were they as long as the first one?
No.
Okay.
I didn't mention the length. The Camino de Francés, the French route, is about 500 miles, 800 kilometers. The North Bay is about 850 kilometers. The Via de la Plata that comes up from the middle of the country, that's the granddaddy of them all, and that's over 900 kilometers. There are routes all around the middle of that, but generally speaking, most folks who are going to walk their first Camino, they usually walk the French route, and that's reflected in the numbers. I don't think I'd do it again, but if I did, I met a little French lady. I don't know if you remember me mentioning that. We sat next to each other at dinner, and she was doing this thing. She put a bug in my ear. Oh my good God. If I was going to go do the French route, I would only stay in the very small villages. I'd avoid the larger centers and just go into the small villages. That's a sneaky way to do it, but I bet it would work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have our itinerary right there. We're gonna arrange our next event is gonna be an outing to the Camino.
Yeah, let me know about that.
Your book is so beautifully written,
Thank you.
and I was looking at the blurb that said it's your first, published work. Have you done a lot of writing previously? And also, you're working on a novel. Is that going to be a spiritual theme?
We'll start at the end first. The novel, the novel is there's a lot to that, but the primary character in that novel is a mystical priest. There may be some Merton in there. There may be my friend Bill in there. Yeah, it's going to be along those lines. I'm answering a lot of questions about my family of origin that I can no longer answer because everybody's dead. And so, what do you need to get questions from people who are no longer around? You need a mystical priest, of course. So that's what that's all about. Thank you for your kind words about my work. I wrote Into the Thin. I also wrote a book called Around the Forever Bend, and that's just some shared wondering about death. I have both of those books here tonight. That's the most plug you'll hear from me, I promise. I had no intention of writing that book, the first book, Into the Thin. I posted a travel blog when I went on the Camino Francés, the first Camino. And it had developed kind of a following somehow. And when I came home, I did it as an act of gratitude. I said, I can't just go flitting off to Spain for 2 months and, not give anything back, for God's sake. So I did this blog. First person photos, first person words. No selfies, no pictures of food. What I saw. And so when I came back, one person, two person, three, like 4 different people I ran into randomly who said, so when are you starting the book? And I'm like, what book? What are you talking about? And I kind of beat the rush and took the hint early, and I started noodling around, and I had about 8,000 words, and I realized that there was something there. I had not written a word creatively in over 25 years at that point. I got caught up. I had a family. I had 2 families, actually. I was married twice. Writing just kept taking this back seat. And the last time I had done any any creative writing was in the 1980s, mid to late 1980s. And at the time, I had a wee bit of a drinking problem, and you can imagine what I was writing. It was beautiful, but it was garbage, you know? So things went better, but that writing voice came back as if I had just blinked my eye. It was unbelievable. And my writing is kind of voicey. It's the same thing. It showed up. Thanks for asking that. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Brian.
Of course, you can start the Camino from anywhere in the world. I mean, in England, Walsingham is a Marian shrine, and a large group of people started their route from there. I mean, I don't know how long it took them. I'm not sure how many survived, but you see, you can. In fact, when I get home to my studio tomorrow, I'm going to build a sign, find out which way is east, and make the sign of the Camino.
It's a spider's web of access routes throughout Europe. In fact, the Via Francigena that goes to Rome starts in Canterbury.
And that near Corunna, there's the English way or something, isn't there? Which basically means, the ships coming from England, they land there, and then they do the Camino from there. And I was struck by something I didn't know about, which you highlighted, which was that the route you took was in 3 stages. I had 3 characters to it. Have you ever read Dante's Divine Comedy? Because it came straight into my head. I mean, also, the ascent to Santiago, because it's high up in altitude. I mean, if you haven't read it, I think it's the greatest book ever written, and it's affected every other thing that's ever been written as well. And I actually, everybody knows the opening piece where, he's lost in a wood, and there's a wolf and a tiger, threatening him, and then Dante comes and helps him out, which, the pilgrims that you might accompany you on your journey. But there are so many parallels. I mean, it's extraordinary. Honestly, I thoroughly recommend you read the book. It's beautiful, and I'm sure it probably sits very nicely in parallel to the book you've written, which I will buy a copy as soon as I can.
All things are one thing.
Yeah.
That's the recurring message. I mean, it's what I took out of all of this, but all things are one thing. And wouldn't it be lovely if we could actually live that way, But those influences, I think, are there's a commonality of inspiration. Yeah, definitely. Anybody else? One more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have helped me connect some interesting journeys, I guess, in my life. 8 or 10 years ago, my brother and I went off to Ireland. I called him and said, "You're looking for the perfect woman to travel with. I'm looking for the perfect man to travel with. How about if we go together?" And we hopped in a car and saw many places in Ireland, and we landed in Dingle. And when we got there, we both looked at each other and said, something's going on here. There's like, something's drawing us to this place. I have gone back there, I don't know how many times it's been now, 8 or 10 maybe. And there is a draw, like I need to be going there. And what you described about the Camino is very much what I'm feeling, but I hadn't really put a name to that. When I went back the first time by myself, I was in a shop and I was explaining this to the shop owner. I don't know what it is about Dingle, but I need to be here. She described the Vale and said it was one of those places where the Vale was very thin. And she said, "What is your last name?" I said, "Kavanaugh." She said, "I'm a Kavanaugh." And there are loads of Kavanaughs that are in this area. The next time I went, I found this little cemetery. I was going to go find my relatives, but it was all in Gaelic, so I couldn't understand any of the headstones. But I found a gentleman and I said, "Could you help me figure out which of these might be Kavanaughs?" "Oh, Kavanaugh. Do you know the pub down the road is a Kavanaugh, and he's been here on and on and on." So there is this deep desire to keep returning to this place, but I had never connected it to this concept of pilgrimage. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Each time I go, it is a pilgrimage. And you've given me permission to go back with a really different sort of a mental set, or maybe a heartfelt set. I'm headed back again the first week of December. I'm gonna look at it differently. There's also a route there, the Irish Way, I think might be what it's called. So I could do an official, you know, walk the way, that kind of thing. There's a reason I came here tonight. It was just great to hear what you had to say and to see this as more than a nice vacation and getaway. It is a spiritual experience. And I was clear about that, but I wasn't sure how to connect the dots. And I think I got that message tonight, so.
You know, there's clues. There's the emotions, right? There's this, my friend, there's a friend of mine who followed me. He ended up being subscribed to this blog that I did. We didn't know each other from Adam. And he became emotionally enmeshed in this thing. And when I came home, he was all over me like white on rice. We gotta meet for lunch. I gotta talk to you. He's one of my best friends now. And with him, every time he thought about the Camino, he'd weep. And the only thing that made the weeping stop was when he booked his air travel. And he knew he was gonna go. And then it stopped. So there's the emotional tag. But you know what gets my attention is synchronicities.
Oh, yeah.
Holy
Oh, yeah.
moly, you had some synchronicities, you know.
All over the place.
Yeah, yeah. And this is the way this stuff comes, you know, yeah. Good on you.
What a nice one to end with.
Yeah, right? So I know we're out of time. I hope, I'd like to actually meet every single one of you. If anybody has books that you already have that you'd like me to sign, you'll find Jennifer and I in the back. I have some stuff for sale. But the thing I want to make sure I get in, if anybody was too bashful to ask a question or say something, please, I beg of you, email me. On my website, there's a contact page. It's authorstevendrew.com, easy to remember. There's a contact page with an email. Drop me an email, tell me that you were here, and please ask. I love to hear from pilgrims, and you're all pilgrims, by the way. So there's that.
That's good. Thank you all. Have some